I think for me, I'm very much a feeler. Becky says she's quite cerebral, whereas I feel everything extremely deeply. I'm one of these overly sensitive people. So a lot of my uncertainty has come with wrestling with who God really is and how he can be good in certain situations. I know he's good, but how does that match up to reality? And where can my hope actually be, and wrestling with those questions. So I think the uncertainty hasn't come in kind of a big decision as much as the little things along the way, broken friendships and disappointments, unanswered prayers, health problems, all those things that throw out those questions of what is God really like, and how can I find safe hope? But he's very good. He doesn't mind my questions, which is a good job. I have a lot of them.
Welcome to our journey to Eden, formerly known as Grow Your Dreams podcast. I've changed the name of the podcast because I feel that our journey to Eden is more fitting for the content that I'm going to be releasing, content focused on developing emotional wholeness and spiritual wholeness. Enjoy as I journey through this conversation with authors of a beautiful book about hope for when life is unexpected. So I met Becky and Rosie at a festival in Cornwall, and I found this beautiful book called Hope Shouts Louder. And these gorgeous ladies have co-authored this book. And it's all about hope, which I think is something we all definitely need in these days and times. And I think as we go through your stories, I might just come up with different questions, but I really want to draw out what you ladies have learned about hope from your individual journeys. So let's start off with Becky. If you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump to Rosie.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Becky. I live in Bristol with my husband, John. He's a pastor in the Free Methodist Church. In fact, currently he oversees the churches in the Free Methodist network in the UK. I was a primary school teacher for about 20 years before I met John. And that was a great sort of half of my adult life to date, if you like. I've been a Christian since I was very small. I think I was 4 or 5. I remember being in bed and asking Jesus into my heart, which was the phrase we used in those days, with my dad, brought up in a Christian home, actually not far from here in Malmesbury in Wiltshire. Is that enough?
Yes, that's a lovely little introduction. And how about you, Rosie? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Rosie. I live in Cornwall. I have 3 children and I homeschool them, so that keeps me quite busy. My husband is pastor, so church is really significant to our lives. We have a lovely dog. So family is really kind of central to my life at the moment.
And how did you ladies meet? And how did this wonderful book come about? Let's go on that journey together quickly.
Okay. John and I were living in St Austell in 2010, and we were planting a church, Light and Life Free Methodist Church. And one Sunday, Pete and Rosie and baby Evan walked into the church, and we became good friends. They stayed and became part of the fabric of Light and Life. Pete is now the lead pastor at that church since we moved away. So that's where we met.
And Rosie, how did this book come about? Whose idea was it?
Well, it kind of, I would say that God put it together, wouldn't you say, Becky?
Sure.
But Becky certainly had the original idea. Becky's always good at telling the original part of this story, aren't you, Becky?
Go on, Becky, your turn.
I think because I did have it in my heart for quite a number of years, I think to write something, I don't know if I ever imagined it actually turning into a real book that people would be holding in their hands, which is, quite miraculous, really. But I had these ideas, I had these chapter headings, I had some content, but not enough to actually write a book initially for a long time. But then I started reading Rosie's blog during lockdown, and I thought, wow, Rosie has a talent. You know, she has this great way of explaining everyday ups and downs in a very earthy way, but grounding it in a scripture or something God has spoken into her heart. And I thought I would like to collaborate with Rosie doing something. I thought that might encourage both of us to actually produce something. And Rosie, unbeknown to me, had been praying, right, Rosie, about how to write and the next step.
I had a real kind of desire in my heart from 2019 to start writing, but I didn't know what God was leading me to write, but I felt I needed to be faithful with it in some small way, or I wasn't, it wouldn't grow. If you don't do something with what he gives you, he can't grow it. So I started a blog just to kind of start doing something. And through that, obviously Becky saw it. But while I was writing my blog, I prayed that I really wanted to write a book, but I didn't have a topic. So if it was God's desire, that he would tell me the topic. And it was about a week later that Becky rang me up and said, Rosie, would you like to write a book with me? I've got the headings. So that very much felt like confirmation to me that it was God.
Wow. And I tell you, this book, I mean, the first chapter, even the heading, expectations versus reality, it just grabbed me. I was like, oh boy, this is going to be one that strikes a few chords, because a lot of us can have certain expectations of how we think life should go. And as Christians as well. I mean, my own experience when I was in a church in South Africa, it was very much prosperity gospel. So God was going to bless you, you were never going to have any problems, and you were going to be wealthy as long as you obviously did everything right. And that actually set me up for a lot of, I think, disappointment, thinking that life should go a certain way and that God was a certain way. And boy, was I wrong. And that sounds a bit like a downer, but it isn't, because we do realize that God is actually much better than the prosperity gospel type of God. So let's jump into the first chapter, expectations versus reality. Becky, what has your experience been in life with expectations versus reality? And what have you learned?
I've learned that our expectations don't happen by and large. I mean, they may do in small ways and maybe sometimes in bigger ways. But I think for me personally, my expectation was as a child, as a young adult, I would get married young. I would have 8 children, and my purpose in life would be to raise these 8 children, and I would be, the center of the home, and everything would revolve around being a mum, a wife and mother. So I ended up at teacher training college, just to fill in time. Might sound a bit awful. Sorry to all the teachers listening, but just to fill in time between leaving school and getting married, basically, and to show, I was willing to do my bit as well. But college came and went, started teaching, and it is a great job. It is a great profession. But, I was aching for that married relationship and the family, and it just didn't happen. And time went on, and there was the hope that was there started to dwindle through my 20s into my 30s, and then approaching 40, still single, still waiting, and nothing had worked out on the marriage front. So reality was very different, and I had to somehow deal with that.
How did you deal with that as being a Christian?
Well, being a Christian absolutely essentially helps, because I think without that, I honestly don't know how I would have coped. I did get in sort of my mid-30s quite depressed, and I think without any faith, that could have ended badly, to be honest with you, if you see what I mean. So I never lost faith. I had to trust that God knew better and bigger, and as you said just now, he does, and that he knew me better than myself, and he knew it would be good for me. And I do believe he also saved me from making mistakes as well in the relationship front, which would have potentially ended in heartbreak and heartache on both sides, which I wouldn't have wanted. So, I had to just cling on to the fact that God loved me. God is good all the time, and that, yeah, he was with me, even in the disappointments, you know, and the crushed dreams and all that. And so, yeah, being a Christian meant I made it. I made it through that really, really tough time. Yeah, there were opportunities, shall I say, but I didn't feel that God was really giving me peace about anyone specific. So, yeah, I just had to keep waiting. One thing I was certain about is to have done things my way just to get what I thought I wanted would not have been right. And I didn't have any peace about pursuing things that God didn't bring into my life. I even thought about adopting as a single parent. I got through round one, you know, and I just couldn't continue because I just felt I was trying to force something to happen that wasn't part of God's plan for me.
And with hope, when you were in those, you know, looking back now at your 30s, when you felt like the dream maybe was crushed, and did you feel like hope was lost? That you thought, okay, you know, this is my life now. God hasn't given me the dream in my heart. Did you ever feel like hope kind of slipped away from you completely?
Thinking back, I would say not completely. It did feel like it at times, but I don't think it was, I didn't lose hope completely. Somehow I thought what I thought I wanted and did want, you know, might still happen as well. But even if it didn't, I made decisions on a daily basis to praise God, to worship him. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't have anyone else to turn to. I've had good supportive friends and family. I don't mean that, but in terms of, you know, the big stuff, in, you know, where you place your hope and your faith, there was nowhere else. It did work for me. My relationship with God was never lost or dead. It did still work, even in those times. And I suppose you need to have your eye on the bigger picture, as in life beyond life, because this life is all we've got right now, but it isn't all there is. You know, we believe in heaven for those that are, you know, belong to the Lord. So in the end, I thought, I don't actually know the answers to my questions. If I never marry and never have children, maybe, you know, being pregnant, or I would have died in childbirth, you know, all these questions and reasons why would come to my mind to rationalize my situation. And then when I did, I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead, but when I did meet John, I did hope then I might still have that elusive child, at least one. That didn't happen. So that was another thing I had to work through. I really thought I'd been given an opportunity at the last gasp, if you like. And it does work for some people at that age, but not for me.
The desire for marriage and children is definitely like a natural instinct. I think a desire that most women just inherently have within them. How did you carry that desire when it wasn't being fulfilled? I think I'm asking this because sometimes that thing can maybe become an obsession, you know, that I will only be happy once I'm, you know, married. I'll only be happy once I have a child. Was anything God taught you around that, you know, about, you know, not getting your fullness from having that dream fulfilled, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It's a really good question. I think, again, the only way to survive it is by hanging on to the fact that God loves me and he's good. And his plans are different. And that there will be a purpose in the current pain. You know, my heart really goes out to people who were in the situation I was in then. It really does, because and some people have talked to me about this since we released Hope Shouts Louder and have started to read it. And I can't say, you know, it'll all be okay. Yes, you will get married and have children. I obviously I can't say that. I am really blessed to be married, and I'm blessed with stepchildren and step-grandchildren. So I feel immensely privileged and humbled by that. And God knew all the time that was going to happen for me, So I think we have to believe God looks at us when we're struggling and so lost in our grief or whatever, and he looks with love in his eyes, because he knows it's not the end of the story. That there is more to come, and there is blessing of some sort. There is blessing. I really think God is moved by our choice and decision to worship him and trust him. In some way that moves him to act. And the obsession thing, yes, I had to guard against that. I didn't want that to be my story. I didn't want to become so obsessed. I would have made bigger mistakes than I did if I had become obsessed with getting what I wanted. And also to prevent yourself becoming bitter and complain all the time and think, poor me. Self-pity is not an attractive quality. If you're still hoping to find somebody, I don't think it's very, the way to go. And I didn't want that. I didn't think I was honouring to God, who I'd given control of my life to. Then who am I to say, God, you have control of my life, but it needs to be like this? That doesn't make sense. But all these things you learn slowly and over time, but yeah, if that's helpful in answering that.
Yeah, would you say it was deciding on what your attitude was? I really like what you said. You decided that you're not going to fall into the self-pity trap, and bitterness. So what was your attitude that you chose then, would you say?
I would say such as I had control over it, to keep my heart soft. It definitely is a choice. I really believe that. I know some people might argue on that front. They might think, I couldn't help this, that, and the other. And your feelings can be very powerful. And we do talk about this in Hope Shouts Louder. Our feelings are vital. We're made to feel, and they're important. But I guess I didn't allow, or I tried not to allow, my feelings to dominate how I thought about how I saw God and how I saw my life. And that's tough. And maybe I'm quite a cerebral person. I hope I'm empathetic and feeling as well. But I know some people do struggle with their feelings being more overwhelming than maybe I did it during those times. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky. I think we'll move on to Rosie's story. I think, what was her chapter? I know it had the word adventure in it, which I do love. God's Great Adventure. Rosie, tell us a bit about your experience of life being unexpected to what you had originally imagined.
I came to know Jesus when I was 6. I had a very kind of naive and basic understanding of who he was. I very much was in awe of him and feared him as our creator and amazing Lord of the universe. But I didn't really know his nature. So I very much wanted to please him and live my life the way he wanted to, but from a distance because he scared me. So I didn't really want to make plans for myself in case I got them wrong. I was quite scared of upsetting God, I think. I really did fear him, and I didn't want to do the wrong thing at all. So I very much prayed about all my decisions, which looking back was the right thing to do. But I think my heart in it was quite legalistic. It was very much from a place of feeling that I should or I wouldn't be acceptable to God, which obviously isn't the right way to be approaching that. But God was very gracious, and he guided me in every step of the way, from going to university and what course to do, and then meeting Pete, my husband, to moving down to Cornwall, and then finally to homeschooling. And it has been an adventure. Each one of those decisions, he's very much revealed the way. It's been a bit like a treasure hunt where you're looking for clues. And then you find the signposts and it all points to the same place.
Oh dear. Cornwall, that incident in Cornwall. You broke up a bit there, Rosie. So backtrack just one sentence.
It very much felt like God was giving me signposts all the way along. And so although I hadn't made plans myself, my plan was to follow his signposts, really, and he very much put them in place for each decision along the way.
Was there any uncertainty in your journey from, what you've experienced in the last, part of your journey with the Lord? Can you tell us a little bit about dealing with uncertainty and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm very much a feeler. Becky says she's quite cerebral, whereas I feel everything extremely deeply. I'm one of these overly sensitive people. So a lot of my uncertainty has come with wrestling with who God really is and how he can be good in certain situations. I know he's good, but how does that match up to reality? And where can my hope actually be? And wrestling with those questions. So I think the uncertainty hasn't come in kind of a big decision as much as the little things along the way, broken friendships and disappointments, unanswered prayers, health problems, all those things that throw out those questions of what is God really like, and how can I find safe hope? But he's very good. He doesn't mind my questions, which is a good job. I have a lot of them.
Likewise. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with unanswered prayer? Because I think it also comes, to with Becky's story, wanting to have marriage and a family, and the answer seemed to be no for so long, or maybe you didn't even hear a no, it was just unanswered, Becky. So Rosie, what was your experience of unanswered prayer, and how have you journeyed with that?
Oh, it's a really good question. I'm not sure I'm actually at the other end of that kind of a journey.
Well, that's good. That's very relatable. I think a lot of us are there, God, why are you answering me? Why haven't you given me what you've promised, or what I think you've promised? How do we deal with that as followers of Christ?
Yeah, I think for me, the unanswered prayers that really frustrate me is when I see friends and people I love suffering with health problems day in, day out, and I'm praying for them. I love them, and I get to God with my heart full of love for them, and I intercede for them, and they're still in pain, and I find that really hard, and I can't understand why. And I can't say I do understand why, and I have to remind myself of who God is, and as I look to him, I see his compassion for that person that I'm praying for, and I know he wants them well. I don't know what those obstacles are, or why he's not intervening, and why they are still in a journey. But I've come to a place of realizing I've got to trust that God has a plan, and that he is over it all. And he sees the end from the beginning. And looking back, I can see the ways that he's brought good out of my pain in different times. And I know that sometimes, I'm not saying he puts illness on anybody, but I think he does allow us to suffer, to learn the lessons, and to be broken to a point where we'll turn to him and we'll actually lay down our pride and our own self-sufficiency and say, God, I can't do it. I welcome you in. And so I can't say I understand why the people I love are still suffering. And I've got, many friends who are suffering with long-term health effects, and family members, and it's really hard. But I do know that God's good, and I think that's where I find my hope in those times. I have to trust his character, that he loves them even more than me. When I feel that love, he's the one that's given me a heart of love for them. He's the one that loves them even more than that. If I feel that way, how much more does he feel that way? So I think that's where I find my hope in that.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about how our faith and our idea of God has to mature. You were speaking about when you were younger, you knew God, and we all go through this phase, and, sometimes it is all, happy-go-lucky, dancing through the clouds and everything's going well, and we don't need to dig deeper. We don't need to trust God deeper. We don't need to hope deeper because, there's nothing, I guess, stressing us in life. And I think in those times we can think God is, in Christianity and following God is supposed to go, all well. We are supposed to get all our prayers answered. But then there does come a point where if our faith and our walk with God, and we when we're supposed to mature, we have to have suffering. I was reading something about they did a test in the 1980s with trees, and they wanted to see if they could, grow trees on Mars or on one of these planets out there in space. So they created these silos, and the trees grew in the silos, but then they continued to fall down. And because their root system wasn't getting strong enough and the actual bark wasn't getting strong enough, so they never reached maturity. And what they found was that trees actually need the stress of wind blowing against them so that they can grow strong roots, and so they can grow something called stress wood. And that's what makes a tree strong and big. It's being stressed in life. And obviously we can have, too much stress, but there is a certain amount of, suffering that we will have in this life, but it actually can be used to make us strong and make our roots go deeper into God and to become stronger, within ourselves. So Becky, how would you say your journey, it's probably a very, very loaded question, but how would you say your journey has made you stronger, of not having your prayers answered during your 20s and 30s and having that burning desire, which is a natural desire to be married and have children, and you're not getting it? How did that stress help you grow?
Well, I guess it's a bit like you were saying with the trees. I think you have to have the roots of your faith just deepening into God and who he is, and finding out more about him all the time. So, I do my best to have a daily interaction with God, as well as through the day as things pop up, and praying for people and things like that. I do read the Bible regularly, and study and belong to a local church, and all the things that good Christians should be doing. And I think you just do grow because of that. There's a natural process of growth, and I feel I'm better equipped now. I hesitate to say things because you don't know what's around the corner, but I would like to think I'm better equipped to deal with whatever comes my way in a way that actually is productive, rather than sinking under it, to be more victorious where I might have lost the battle or whatever. And so, yeah, I have a real passion to finish well. I hope that's decades off, but, I want to get to the end with a praise on my lips and declaring God is good. I was privileged 3 years ago to be close to my dad when he was living with us, and at the end of his life. And although there was a degree of dementia, what was absolutely clear in the frail body was his spirit was strong, his faith was strong. He would pray more than have a conversation. He would pray out loud, and it was just so heartwarming and comforting to know that he had this strong relationship with God over, he was quite depressed through his life. He had ups and downs, although he was a church leader himself. Life was difficult for him, but, through it all, he had these roots that were unshakable and unbreakable. And now he's safe for eternity. And that's such a blessing and a comfort. And I want to be the same, and I want to inspire those that come after me to keep going as well. So it's a bit of a ramble, but
no, I love that. I actually would love you to ramble more about that, because you do talk about leaving a legacy, and I think that is something really important, to be thinking about in our lives, no matter what age we are, because our time here on earth is, we're not here for eternity. We've got a short time. So how would you encourage someone, who's starting on their journey to start thinking about what legacy do they want to leave, and what kind of pointers would you give to someone on as we begin to think about that for ourselves, leaving a legacy?
Yeah. Well, with the grandkids, I am drip feeding them, unbeknownst to them maybe, the truth that God has a plan for their life that is the best. It's plan A. Now, they obviously are free to choose whether they follow God or not. But as if, the adults in the family are all praying that they will, because we know it's best for them. So it is really very much in my mind to just talk about God as interacting with our lives day by day, having the best for us, as I say, having a good purpose and a plan, and to fulfill his plan for our lives. I think that's something, again, we talk about in the book, because, amazing though it sounds, and even thinking it and saying it out loud, it sounds crazy, but God has a plan for our individual life that he planned from before we were ever conceived, and way before that even. It is mind-blowing, but how exciting is that? Because this is our Creator and our Father who loves us. So following that through our lives, I think, is just something I would encourage anyone to do. See what God leads you to. Be open. Obviously, we have to be proactive. We're, rational human adults. We need to make decisions about where we live, jobs, all sorts of things. But prayerfully before God, asking him to overrule if we are going slightly off track. Just sticking with him, following him.
I love that. Thank you. I've been encouraged by that, definitely. And Rosie, you talk about making life count in the book. What has your journey been with making life count? What does that look like? I like how you spoke earlier about the signposts God has given you. So another loaded question from me. But how do you know God's signposts? That's a big question. And how do you make life count? No pressure.
I think with the signposts, it's very much about learning to recognize his very, very small voice and that peace in your heart about decisions. And that really is what's guided me with each of those decisions. It's been a deep peace. Because I'm such an emotional person, I'm very good at not feeling peaceful, at getting worried or anxious. Or I think God's very good at showing me through my peace if things aren't him. I just don't feel right about it. And because I've kind of got used to being able to follow that peace, it does require kind of really staying close to him and not having your emotions disturbed by a whole load of other stuff. But over time, he's guided me in that way. And like with the job situation years ago, my first job after university, the only thing I had peace about doing was being a support worker, which didn't actually use my degree at all. But I trusted him that was what he wanted, because when I kind of looked at different options, that was one that had suddenly presented itself, and that gave me peace. And looking through the newspaper, there was one job that stood out. So I applied and they gave me an interview. But nothing about its logistics were right, but I had peace to go for the interview, so I went for it. And they actually gave me a job through that wasn't being advertised. They were the right hours for me. They were actually, it was the perfect job, but it wasn't advertised. They had advertised a different one. And if I hadn't have gone for that interview, I never would have received that job. So I think God was very gracious, and maybe he plays the game with us if we're willing to play the game with him and follow our peace. I think he likes that, and he gives us a bit of an adventure along the way.
Yes, I love that. I love the word adventure. It does sound exciting. And walking with God is supposed to be an adventure, isn't it? It's not supposed to be all heavy and, depressing or, even, and through the hard times as well, he can even turn that into something deeply meaningful and an adventure, even though it might be very uncomfortable. But I want you to go a bit more into making life count. I kind of feel like you'll have some pointers for me and for the listeners. How would you encourage someone to make their life count?
I think the key is to look at what God's put in your hands. I think God has put stuff and people and responsibilities in each of our hands, and they can feel like a barrier to actually serving God if we allow them to. If we have this image that serving God is being, on a stage or a missionary or doing something impressive. And sometimes the things in our hands feel like they're chains around us that are tying us up. But actually, if we consider that God's sovereign, he's the one that's allowed those things to be in our hands and maybe even put them in our hands purposefully. And I think the very key thing is to be faithful with what he's given us. Much like that story in the Bible of the talents, where where the rich man gave 3 servants some money to take care of. And the 2 that grew the money that he gave them, he praised and said, well done, good and faithful servant. And the one who just buried it in the ground and done nothing with it, he took it away from them. And I feel like it's about looking at what God's given us and saying, whatever you have given me, whatever you've put in my hand, be it a very small skill. I might only make cheese on toast. That might be the only meal I can do, but I'm going to serve people with that. I'm going to love serving people and hosting people with my cheese on toast. Whatever it might be, it doesn't need to be grand for us to offer it up.
That's really beautiful. And I love that story in the Bible, the talents. It's something I've been thinking about recently as well, just with where I'm at in life. And, what is in my hands? What am I supposed to do with it? And, what are my talents? And what struck me was the servant who was unfaithful, he buried it because he was afraid, and I think he was afraid. It says he was afraid of the master, that if he did it wrong or whatever. So fear is a big thing. And sometimes it can really, jump out at us from nowhere. And it can really, when I've looked at my own life, it can really stop me from taking opportunities or even reaching out to an opportunity. Fear of, that I won't get it or they won't like me or, whatever the fear, whatever shape it comes in. What's your journey been with fear, Rosie? And how can you encourage someone who's kind of battling with fear at the moment?
That is such an apt question. It really is. Because releasing this book revealed all my fears. I knew I had some. You always know, don't you, when you have fear in your life. I've always been a people pleaser and been afraid of upsetting people. And it's exhausting trying to please everyone, but I really have tried. How
did that work out for you?
Well, I think I got burnt out rather a lot. You can never please everyone, can you? However much you try. And I was terrified of public speaking, and it was the one thing I wouldn't do. This would have terrified me, speaking to you here. And as soon as Becky and I realised our book was about, actually, it wasn't just writing it in the comfort of our homes anymore. We were going to be given opportunities like this. Fear really took a grip of me, and I knew I had to make a decision whether I was going to say no to every opportunity or finally put it in God's hands and say I was going to obey him, not fear. And so I made that choice to pray that prayer, and it felt scary because I knew that God would hold me to it, and he has. He's given us a lot of opportunities since the book's come out. But the fear isn't gripping me the way it was. I think even just facing it and saying, I'm not going to listen to fear as my boss anymore, has meant it's retreated hugely. And now it is simply a matter of keeping my mind in the right place and knowing that I have overcome fear. It's been wonderful to be free from it, to be honest. I've got to nearly 40 and been very controlled by fear, and to suddenly be free from it feels like having a massive chain taken off me.
Has there been any scriptures or any pictures that you've kind of held in your heart that has helped you combat fear? So, because when we have this fear thing, sometimes we have to really combat it with a clear thought or a picture that we have in our hearts, or was it just that clear choice for you of like, I'm not going to let you rule me?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think lots of scriptures kind of feed into it. But I can hear God prophetically often, and I have been feeling this sense of the Lion of Judah wanting to roar through me. It probably sounds really strange. Wow. A couple of years ago, and at the time I thought, oh goodness, I hope that's metaphorical. That can be in prayer, that's it. And I think he's actually prepared me to have something to say that I want to say enough, that I do feel that I want him to be proclaimed. I want him, I want his might and majesty and the awe of God to be revealed enough that it overcomes fear. And I think it's not a roar. Obviously, none of you wants to listen to a roar. But it's that kind of a passion of sharing how amazing Jesus is that I feel he started putting it in here, and it's now coming out.
That's so beautiful. And yeah, that's what I did mean about the picture, because I think it is sometimes so helpful for us to have some metaphor in our mind, or a picture of what God is like and his characteristics that he wants us to take onto ourselves. So that's actually very helpful for me. And we are supposed to be as, bold as a lion, which I just love that picture of a lion. It's beautiful. Would you have any final encouragements for someone, Rosie, for someone who's really battling in their life at the moment, who's feeling hopeless and fearful?
It's a good question. I think every situation is very different. But I think the encouragement is that they're never alone in that situation, that God is always there, and that he has always got an amazing way of using our pain and making it into something of worth. It takes a long time to call it beautiful, doesn't it? But it's out of our pain that we're able later on to really empathize and care for and minister to others. And it's from that place, I think, that he teaches us the deep truths. Like you said about the trees and the roots to go deep. It is in those hard times when our roots go really deep and we have to see who is God really. And even if people don't see how God is at work in their lives, even the matter of them clinging on while they're being so buffeted by those storms means their roots are going deep.
Yes.
Just standing against that opposition and those fears, I think that in itself is creating growth in them. And I think there's hope that God's always using these hard times for good.
Beautiful. Thank you. Becky, how would you encourage someone, similar question, but more someone who's kind of hopeless in the waiting season? It's been a long time for them. They continue to wait for God. They think he's not going to come round for them. How would you encourage someone who's hopeless?
Well, I would want to say, hang on, keep going, keep trusting, keep believing, keep worshipping. I really feel worship in the waiting is a very precious thing. It's a real sacrifice that I think the Bible talks about, a sacrifice of praise. And for me, it felt like that when I was driving to school through tears, praying out loud, day after day, week after week, month after month, etc. But I knew, even in choosing to worship, that was blessing God, and that was doing me good as well. And it did help to, as we've talked about, to mature and grow and to keep persevering. We were never promised everything we wanted. We were never promised this life would be easy and full of sunshine. There are storms, there are challenges. And as Rosie says in the book, Jesus, he didn't stop the storm until asked. He was with the disciples in the storm. He was fine in the storm with them. They were not fine because they didn't have faith in who he was. So God can do anything. He did stop the storm. But I think knowing that closeness and just asking God to be close at those times is so important. And a verse, because I battle with negative thoughts, insecurities like the rest of us, we all do. And the verse, the Lord will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is fixed on him. He is faithful in that. And so I force my mind to focus on the Lord and to praise him. And it's amazing how he rushes in. He doesn't just think, oh, okay. He is so wanting to envelop us and to propel us forwards. He is committed to that. When we follow him, it's such an important lesson I learned back in my 20s. I was actually teaching abroad for a couple of years, and I heard somebody say, God is committed, 100% committed to the welfare of the surrendered. And I've lived by that. If I surrender to God, he is committed to me. Which is fantastic because he won't fail. he is able to do all that needs to be done, and I'm wavering about, And it's just so comforting. So it is hard. Yes, it's hard. But to keep going is so important. And I do feel blessing is unlocked eventually at some point in some way, more than we can ask or imagine. It's not just a little pat on the back. It is an overwhelming download of wonder that we can't know before it happens.
That's so beautiful. I realize we've spoken a lot about God and Jesus and, faith in this episode, which is kind of, very integral to having a hope that isn't fixed in, fleeting things, the fleeting things of this life. And I'm aware that some listeners, they won't have a faith. They may be kind of on the edge of, what is this Jesus about and God? And I wonder, Becky, what would you say to someone who's kind of sitting on the fence about God and surrendering their life to God, as you spoke, about surrender?
Well, I would want to encourage someone to explore that relationship for themselves. And the thing is that there comes a moment where you choose to try that. And as soon as you do, it's real. But God doesn't force his way onto us. He's waiting for us to look in his direction. And it really is only a glance or a look. There was a lovely testimony I heard a few years ago from a guy in St. Austell who said, I just I glimpsed at heaven and heaven opened. And so anyone who is considering, is this real? I would just encourage you to try it. Just say, God, if you're real, please show me. And God knows how to communicate with every one of us in a way that we know he's talking to us and he's on our case, as it were. God desires that relationship with all of us. So, I would just encourage someone to do it. Maybe if you know a Christian, to ask them to pray with you, to go along to a church, read the Bible, just dip into it, see how it speaks to you. It is a living word. That sounds crazy if we're not used to that concept, but God can use those words to really speak into your spirit. God is amazing when he bypasses our brain almost, because we are spiritual beings. We have eternity in our hearts, so we can be awakened in that way without even knowing what's happening. Our spirit can be touched. So, get in touch.
Ladies, thank you so much. I'm aware of the time. I'm aware Rosie has some little ones and she's had a long day. So what we'll do is we'll definitely have you on again and just go deeper into your individual stories of, dealing with disappointment and how you kind of got through that. So, and I think that'll be really helpful for listeners in the next episode. So I look forward to having you on again. And thank you so much for being with me. I've absolutely loved this conversation. And, I've actually read the first few chapters, not only once, a couple of times now, just because I found them so encouraging. So I do really, really, really want to encourage listeners to pick up this book. Beautiful book, Hope Shouts Louder, and you will find links to where you can buy this in the show notes and in the description below. So thank you, ladies.